to welcome everyone to the webinar today. Thank you for being here. I'm Cheryl Hart. I'm president of Corfa, and I just have one quick announcement before we start with today's program, and that is that our webinar next month will be on the Blue Goose Passport, the new version of the Blue Goose Passport that's being created with Kristen Gilbert from Fish and Wildlife Service doing the presentation. So if you have ideas about what might be make that an even more useful item, if you're as anxious as a lot of people are to get it in your store right away, we hope that you will join that webinar. So let me introduce today's presenters. Sharon and Mike Scott. Sharon is a current board member of Hakalau Forest, National Wildlife Friends of Hakalau Forest, National Wildlife Refuge, and Mike is a former board member. And they were co-founders of the Hakalau Endowment. That endowment started in 2015, and it's now just short of $3 million, and they plan to reach 3.5 million by the end of this calendar year. With that, as a little teaser for you, I'm going to turn it over to Sharon and Mike.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cheryl. I'm going to do just sort of an outline today of what it takes to get started on an endowment, what it takes to keep one running, what kind of staff you have to have, or volunteers that you have to run one successfully. It won't cover everything that you'd need to know, but it's enough, I think, to get people started thinking about endowments and what it would take to have one. And then we hope to have at least a half an hour, if not more, time for questions at the end. So if there are things that I don't cover adequately, jot them down, or I guess they've got the chat running, so you could put a question in the chat, and I'll try and keep an eye on that.
Sharon, if it would be best if they put them in the chat, and I'll watch that for you, so you don't have to unless you just want to.
Okay. Anyway, you want to give a lot of thought to what you want to use your endowment for and what it might be called, because these two decisions will affect your ability to attract donors. The organization for which you work or where you volunteer needs to make sure that creating an endowment is in the scope of your friends group and its bylaws, and not against any state or federal rules. And I'm not going to get into details of that kind of thing now, but just realize that there are bylaws that you have for your own group that may have some influence on whether or not you start an endowment or how an endowment would be used. And there are federal rules, such as not ever fundraising on refuge property, which people always have to keep in mind. You can't do these things at the refuge itself. Our endowment agreement is with the Hawaii Community Foundation, and it specifies that, and I quote from our endowment agreement, it's to support a diversity of ecological management projects that will benefit the refuge, including but not limited to invasive plant and animal control, fence construction and maintenance, and propagation and outplanting of native plant species. And we have decided at the outset that we would not ever provide funds for staff salaries at any level. The federal government will have to provide whatever salaries for staff there is. But the Friends group, of course, comes up with many, many volunteers to do projects. So we don't have to fund a lot of the work for these things that are going on. And we try at all times to avoid anybody thinking that these funds are to replace or supplement regular federal funding that the refuge receives. And that is where you have to be very careful in your wording in your endowment to make sure that you understand the kinds of projects you can do and the things you can't do, like, provide additional funding for their staff. And you need to make sure that the refuge management and staff understand the purpose of your endowment, hopefully before you get it started, um, and how it's going to be dispersed and when it will be dispersed. The refuge manager needs to be in the loop all the time when you're planning this and understand how the funds are going to be used so that you don't blindside them with something once you've got it established. Um, the first thing you'd have to do once you've made the decision to have an endowment, and that may be problematic, as Mike can explain.
Oh, in terms of the endowment, when we initially started thinking about raising funds for Friends of Hakalan projects and everything, there was a lot of effort to do a specific projects. At the time that we established the endowment, the largest single project that the Friends of Hakalan had ever undertaken was $10,000 for a water tank. We thought bigger than that. It took $50,000 to establish the endowment with the Hawaii Community Foundation. There was a lot of pushback from inside the board of the Friends of Hakalau against that. They wanted to not have the endowment. They wanted to do one project at a time. That was a 2-year conversation about the value of an endowment, what it meant, what it could be. And you need to have that conversation, and it's entertaining. It also drags out for a very long time. And you need to think boldly about what you're going to go after. Think big, not small.
And anyway, once you've made the decision amongst your board or your membership that you're going to do this, the first thing you have to do is find out who's going to handle the money for you and invest it, who you're going to have the endowment with. If you have a community foundation available to you, which most states and a lot of cities even have, that's probably the easiest plan is to establish one through an existing foundation. Um, that way you know in advance how much you're going to be charged and what kind of services that you're going to get. Um, Things to consider are they prepared to receive online donations, which some organizations are not? Do they maintain records that are readily available to you? Be sure you're able to get names, addresses, emails, etc. for each donor, which is not a small thing. It can be a real challenge to find out who your donors are when you're not receiving the checks yourself personally, which you don't want to do. Um, and then you need to ask whether their management fees are reasonable. And that's another decision for you and your board to decide on what you're comfortable with. Ours is a 1% annual thing on the current value of the endowment. And when you get to be a large money, that is a lot of money, but they're performing a lot of service for you. So we feel it's more than worth the money that we pay.
It's about 1%.
That's what I said. Um, and then will they let you hold your endowment without disbursements for a number of years? And that wasn't an issue for us at the beginning when we talked to the management of the endowment. Mike and I were over in Hawaii at the time and did this in person. Um, and they wanted us to set something up and start dispersing immediately, 4% a year off of whatever we had. And we thought, Hakalau needs so much money. We're so short of funds for management on the refuge that we need to build this endowment as fast as we can. And if we start dispersing 4% a year, it's not going to grow fast enough. So we negotiated with them for some time, and they finally agreed to let us wait and raise funds until um,
23.
our endowment reached 3.5 million. And then we would start to disperse. And as Cheryl said at the beginning, we started this endowment in 2015. And we expect that by the end of this calendar year, we will hit that 3.5 million. So we've been 10 years, almost 11 years, fundraising. And by next year, by January or February of 27, we expect to be doing our first disbursement. So be aware that it does take time to get the large amounts of money, unless you're lucky enough to have some very wealthy donors who give you a $500,000 or something to start with. But most of us have to start slowly and build to that kind of money. Um, anyway, just be aware that it may take some time, but it does build faster if you don't disperse for a while.
Our initial disbursement will be close to $100,000. That by 2030 will be $140,000 if we keep the same 3.5 million in. But the endowment will continue to grow even with disbursements at 2 to 3% a year. So eventually we'll reach a higher number fairly quickly.
On average, most endowments will grow at about 6%, maybe 6.5% a year. And if they disperse 4%, ours is set to disperse 4% of the average value of the fund over the previous 48 months. So you have to do the math every time to see what your average is for each of the previous 48 months, and then they'll disperse 4% of that. But if it's earning 6% or more, the balance that you don't disperse goes back into building the endowment. So even if you cease to raise funds for your endowment after you reach your goal, it will still grow, or should, if your foundation is doing its job, which most of them do a great job. We're very happy with the community foundation that we use. But it will continue to grow. And once you've reached that first goal, the next question is whether or not you continue to raise funds for it to make it even larger. And that's a decision that we haven't entirely settled among ourselves, but is still being discussed. Because, of course, costs of everything are rising, costs of labor, costs of supplies. Goodness knows the cost of fencing can be astounding, especially if you're in a wilderness area with difficult terrain. It can cost many, many dollars to do a foot of fencing. So if costs are going up, maybe we will need to increase our endowment size and continue to raise money, new money, to get closer to 5 or 6 million. But that's a discussion that's going and probably will be as long as we have the endowment. Disbursements are generally paid to the Friends of the Refuge. They're not paid to the refuge itself for various fiscal financial reasons. The refuge can't receive donations directly except within very small rules that we won't go into now. It's complicated. And there is generally a rule about them ever receiving more than $25,000 at a time from an outside organization. But right now, our refuge manager and the president of our friends group are working on some special paperwork that's going to allow us to disperse as much as $96,000 or $97,000 this next year. And we will be doing that, of course, annually. And so we're working ahead of time to get everybody up the line to approve them receiving this money every year, which is not a routine thing for refuges. So it's paperwork that has to be planned out ahead of time. The other thing, once you've decided on who's going to manage your endowment, is to find out what their rules are. Commonly, most foundations, I think, would require you to have at least $50,000 to start an endowment. Some of them may be higher than that, but ours luckily was 50,000, and we could come up between us and a couple of other people we knew. We came up with 6 families, basically 6 couples that contributed $10,000 each to get us started.
that original group, all with one exception, were all members of the Friends group. And so that's important. So they knew the refuge, and we called 7 people asking for $10,000 from each one of them. 6 of the 10 said yes. The seventh had a bigger ambition. He was about homeless people, and that was a bigger need in his mind. And so he didn't give it to us. But 6 out of 10 said yes. And that was 2 days of phone calls. So use your used car salesman approach, call somebody and when they pick up the phone, say, have I got a deal for you? And then go from there.
First, you have to have somebody like Michael, who's a great salesperson. Um, but it's true that if you're going to fundraise, you have to not be bashful about it. You're going to have to talk to people about giving money. And that's not a comfortable thing for everybody, but you have to assume that that's what everybody on your committee and on your board is going to have to do. You're going to have to approach people and ask them for money on a regular basis, not just during some campaign, but year round. Because you need to keep the refuge and the endowment in the front of people's minds. So they're thinking about it all the time. When they plan out their giving for the year, they need to think about you as a regular thing that they give to. Um, you need to form a committee to deal with your endowment within your friends group. Somebody needs to make the decisions on how you're going to raise the money, what kind of mailings you're going to do, what kind of social media procedures you're going to use, how long you want the campaign to go on. You probably are not going to fundraise year round because people will get burned out. Um, so the first 10 years, we've done a 4-month campaign at the end of each year, September through December. And it's worked fine for us. We've, gotten increasing amounts of money during that period as we develop a mailing list. And that's something else I'll talk about in a few minutes. Um, you need to start record keeping right away and start a mailing list with those board members and members of your friends group that you can convince to be your early donors. And you'll need to designate someone to be the keeper of those records. And that's a job. That's something that I do now, and have done for about 4 years now myself, and probably have at least another 2 years to go. It does take time year round as well as during your fundraising period in the year, to maintain a large spreadsheet and maintain the data in it, the addresses, phone numbers, emails, if you can get a hold of them, and other information about your donors. We started with a committee of 7 people who met once a month to plan our first big fundraising campaign, for which we produced a two-sided brochure, rather like this. One side, 2 sides, that tells about the birds on our refuge, the endangered birds that the refuge is all about, tells how to give, what the purpose is, what the endowment is going to provide.
Karen, I put it in the chat. This is Pete.
Okay, who can see your messages?
I think everybody can. I put it in the chat.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, Bruce.
Anyway, we send
Thank
these
you.
out to anyone who has already given us a donation, starting with your board members, your members, friends, family, anybody you talk to. Tell them what you're doing. Hand them a brochure. We have gone so far as to pass them out when we're on vacation. We take a stack along, and as we visit with people, you always run into people who are also interested in wildlife, interested in conservation. You pull one out of your purse and hand them brochure. You never know when somebody is going to be interested in what you are doing. Um, we have donations now from 41 states and 5 foreign countries. And these are not all people who have ever been to Hakalau or even heard of it before, but they'll either see a brochure or they will see it on a social media post, which we do periodically throughout the year, but a couple of times a month during our active campaign, we'll put a social media picture up with a picture and some discussion of how the campaign is going and what it's for. And it's amazing the people across the country that will see this stuff, even though they've never heard of us before, and they'll send in $50 or $100 or something. And you may only get one donation from them, but they may end up being regular donors if you make a connection with them. And that's the next thing that we did, was decide that when we did receive a donation, that person would get a personal handwritten thank you note, not just a tax receipt that comes off a machine, um, but something handwritten by one of our committee members. So our 7 people were each assigned a portion of all our donors to write to. And so when I receive the notice of a donation from the foundation, I look up who their contact person is, which is part of my spreadsheet, and I send them an email and say, 1 or 2 of your people have just sent in a donation. Please get a thank you note out to them right away. And the ideal is to get it out within a week or two, but you may not get word of the donations quite that quickly, depending on the procedures of your foundation you're working with and how quickly you can get the information from them. That'll vary, depend on who you're working with.
It's important that a personal thank you note go out in addition to the tax recognition, because that's a personal contact, and that's above and beyond the normal thank you, and that's important. And quickly, usually within, like Sharon indicated, within a week.
So we do the best we can. Anyway, our annual campaign for the last 10 years has mostly been just this mail and social media contacts with people, and a certain amount of emailing back and forth with some individuals who express a particular interest. When I do thank you notes myself, I always put my email at the bottom under my signature, just in case they want to get a hold of you or have a question or something. Very few of them will respond to that, but you give them the opportunity to build a relationship with you and to learn more about your refuge if they're not already a member of your friends group or something. Let's see, what was the other thing? We also have several professional bird guides who take small groups up to Hakalau, which is a wilderness refuge. It's not on a main highway of any kind. It's very hard to get to. It's 10 miles off of any kind of a main road, on a very rough, frequently almost impassable road. Um, so not a lot of individual people, unless they have a four-wheel drive and are very brave. Not too many of them wander up to the refuge just on their own. Um, So there are 5 or 6 professional guides who take small groups up 2 or 3 days a week. Um, and they pass out brochures to all their people. They pass them out once they've gone to the refuge, because we don't want to fundraise on the refuge. But we get a lot of donations from those people. And all of those, of course, go on the master donor spreadsheet immediately. If they get a donor, they get in the spreadsheet. And so every time we start a campaign, all those people hear from us again, unless they take the trouble to write and say, please don't send me any more of these. I don't want to hear from you, which I've heard exactly once in 10 years. Only one person has ever said they want to be off our mailing list. So I consider that a good thing, that they don't mind hearing from us.
We started out with 12 donors the first year, and now we have 997. So it's one donor at a time that builds.
It really does. It's amazing how many come in. I'm always surprised to see the ones that I haven't ever seen before. I said, I don't recognize this name. By golly, it's a new one. And then I sometimes have to wait a couple of days before I get an address from them, so I don't know where they're from. But if it turns out they're from Rhode Island or something, I figured, well, they must be watching us on social media because they probably have not been out to Hawaii to see Hakalau. Um, anyway, we put social media things out on Facebook, Instagram, and it used to be Twitter, but I'm not sure that our social media people are using Twitter anymore since it became X. It's not so popular anymore, but there are various places. There's another one, Blue something, Blue Sky or something, that I think they're using a little bit now. But wherever they put them, people do respond, and that's great.
We have one social media person, Debbie Anderson, who's sort of a force of nature, and she really gets the word out to the world.
Well, she puts together the posts, and then we have a tech person who's a faculty member at the University of Hawaii who does the actual posting online. She's the one that has the media savvy to be able to manage boosting things on, I don't know, stuff that I don't understand at all. But she keeps things going on the social media all the time. So between Debbie and Alyssa, they do a great job for us, and we get a lot of donations from people that are not connected to any of the guides or our friends group. And like I say, we pass out brochures to people we see. I mean, we gave somebody one just a couple of days ago when we were birding down in Arizona, and we're talking to another birder along the way and gave them a brochure and said, here's what we're working on. Maybe you'd be interested in coming out and seeing our refuge. Um, they'd never been there, but maybe they'll be interested and maybe we'll get a little gift from them.
If you're wearing a T-shirt from your refuge with the name of the refuge on the back of it, we've had people come up to us and look at the picture of the Kia Palau and ask us what that was all about, and they got a brochure. Okay. So you could be a moving poster.
Yeah, I
A
mean,
sandwich.
it is important to get your membership as well as your board to understand that they all have to sort of participate in this activity, that it's not a one person thing to send out some mailing and collect checks. Everybody has to be out there talking to people, talking it up, telling them that we're doing this, telling them why it's important for your particular refuge. If you have needs out there, like fencing is a big one for us, and it's expensive because we have lots of problems with feral pigs that really tear up the habitat. Um, and mongoose and rats and other things that we're fighting all the time, as well as mosquitoes, who are a big problem for us, but a lot harder to deal with. You can't fence them out, I'm afraid. Um, but you need to tell people that we need this money because we don't have enough money in the refuge budget to cover, fencing that costs as much as what, several $1,000s a foot.
Wow.
Well, it was
Yeah.
like $250,000 a mile or something. Big bucks. And right now, our refuge needs 7 miles of renewed or repaired fencing. So that will be one of our first priorities when we start disbursements, is getting them money for additional fencing and for fence repair. And it is not cheap. Anyway, things to think about. Um, what was the next thing? Oh, the record keeping. Um, as I said, you do need somebody to take on the job of maintaining records on what you're taking in all the time and what you're doing. And that can be amazingly time consuming. And it's also something that really only one person can do. When we first started up our spreadsheet, two of us had access to it. Um, and the data that we get from the Hawaii Community Foundation goes into a program called the Donor Sphere, where they post the names and amounts of the donation of people that have given us something. And I have to log into that daily during a campaign or at least weekly the rest of the year to see if anything has come in. And then I have to wait or find a different source for the address that goes with that name and amount. And right now, there are only two of us, Debbie Anderson and myself, who have access to that donor sphere. It's a closely guarded secret. We can't have everybody looking at the names and amounts of the donations because that would create a lot of privacy problems. People would not want the amounts of their donations being looked at by lots of people. They're not made public. We don't announce their names anywhere. Um, in fact, they can keep their name off of our records entirely by donating anonymously, which we've had maybe 70 or 80 anonymous donations in the last few years. And those, all that I get on DonorSphere is anonymous $100. And I'll never know anymore. I will never see an address or the person's name. And that's fine. We get the $100. We're happy for it, but there's no way we can send them a thank you note. Or um, we don't send out the tax receipt for that. That comes from the community foundation. They'll send them a tax receipt, but we don't know who it goes to. And but I do record it as an anonymous donation with the date, um, so that we keep track of how many people are giving, even if we don't know who some of them might be.
Median gift over the years has been $100 to $200 for a median gift.
The things that I record are name, address, emails, if they happen to give it. Depends on how they donate. If they donate directly to our community foundation by email, it does collect an email for them. Some of them who simply mail in a check, I don't necessarily get an email unless they happen to put one on their check, which not that many people do, I think. We also, of course, keep track of the amount of the donation, and my spreadsheet also includes the name of the contact person who will be writing them a thank you note, one of the members of our endowment committee. And so I know who's responsible for that donor all the time. And it's up to me when they donate something to let their contact person know, because the contact people will not all see this. They can't see DonorSphere themselves. They have to get it from me. So the person that you have keeping your records needs to have the time and the determination to stick with this all the time. And it needs to be a daily thing during your fundraising time. You can't take weeks off while you're running a fund. You've got to be around to watch your computer almost daily.
It's the Full Employment Act.
It really is. The other thing we have had some issues with are couples who have different surnames. And one year, one of them may write a check, and the next year or 2 years later, the other one will write a check, and I don't know that they go together. Um, so I find that out sometimes, usually because when I go to enter the address that comes with that name, it pops up in Excel. And I know that it floods into the cell by itself. And I said, uh-oh, that address is already in my spreadsheet someplace. So I have to go down through and find out who else has that same address. And then I'll find another name with a different surname, and it's up to me to figure out if they really are a married couple and should be listed in one listing or separate. If they don't happen to be married, which is sometimes the case too. but it's something that you need to deal with and decide how you're going to keep such records. I choose to put married couples together in one listing, not as separate things. It's simply too confusing and repetitive. If you're doing thank you notes, you don't want to do two of them to the two members of a couple.
You're right.
Let's see, who else? This record keeping person is the one who's going to be interfacing with your foundational organization. So you need to make sure you've got some place at your foundation where you can call for questions or problems with the records or something else. So make sure they have somebody assigned to your endowment that you can contact on a daily basis if you run into something. And that's something that you can find out when you first set up your endowment. Make sure that your record keeper is going to have someone they can talk to on a daily basis whenever they run into a question. What else? Almost to the end here. It is possible to record the dates of donations, but if people give more than once a year, which a surprising number of people do, and you try to record the date of each donation, it gets your spreadsheet to be very long and spread out and hard to scroll through. With our 997 active donors right now, it takes a long time to spread through that list and look for some particular name or for some particular address. So I choose not to add dates of donations, because after 2 or 3 years, you've got somebody who's given 5 or 6 things and their donation cell is going to get huge. And for the most part, it doesn't matter after they've given it or what date they gave it on. The foundation will send your donors a tax receipt unless they get the money from a different source. And that's the one last thing I was going to talk about was we've had issues with people not understanding the description we have of how to give in our brochure. We try and tell them exactly what to do, but some of them make mistakes and will write their check to the Friends of Hakalau rather than to the Hawaii Community Foundation. That means the check can only be deposited by our friend's treasurer into our friend's account. And it belongs over in the Community Foundation account. To get it there, the treasurer has to write a separate check. The foundation can't deposit a check that's made out to the friends. So he has to write a new check to the Community Foundation. And when they get it, you lose all the names and addresses because the Community Foundation will only record it as a gift from the Friends of Hakalau, since that's what the check that they get has on it. They do not recognize the name of the individual people who contributed that money eventually. That means I have to bug our treasurer every time there's a check like that, or sometimes 3 or 4 of them in a month. Say, please send me a list of all the people who've given this money so I can get them into my spreadsheet. I have no other way to find out who they are. So it's a problem. And we try each year to redo the way that we discuss how to give money and make it clearer. Right now, QR codes is I'm a real fan of, because we can put in our brochure a QR code that they can scan that takes them directly to the Hawaii Community Foundation page for our specific endowment. There's no way for them to go wrong. If they scan that code, it will take them right there, and all they have to do is put in the amount of their donation. So think about it when you describe to people where you want them to send the check. Don't get it deposited in your friend's account and have trouble getting it into the endowment. I think that's about all that I had to say. The last thing was deciding on disbursements, and we've already talked a little bit about that. You'll decide at the beginning sometime, or maybe change your mind about how and when you want to disperse money. But when you do start it, you have to work with your refuge manager to create a special agreement that will allow you to disperse large funds of money to the refuge. Right now, for Hakalau at least, the limit is $25,000 a year, and we'll be donating much more than that to the friends to use on the refuge. So they're creating some new paperwork that is going up through the regional offices and all, and that will be approved eventually and signed off on sometime during this year, so that we can give this money legally and nobody will question it or question how it's used, because that has to be specific. Um, the last thing is to make sure your endowment gets credit for its accomplishments. Once a big project is done, once you start dispersing and you're doing something, take pictures, run an article about it in your newsletter, put it on your refuge website, or send out an email about it to all your members and all your donors. After you've worked hard to make all this happen, you want donors and volunteers and other supporters to appreciate the progress that's been made on the refuge because of the endowment. And that, of course, will encourage more people to continue to give to the endowment if they realize what you're doing. So, what kind of questions do you have? What else can we tell you or clarify if this hasn't all been clear?
So we have a few questions in the chat. I'll start out with those, and then after we've
Okay.
gone through those, people can either continue to add questions in the chat, or at the end, we'll just open up the mics and let you raise your hand if you want to ask a question. The first one is, can we get a copy of your endowment agreement?
Mm, I think so.
Shouldn't be a problem.
If that's possible, if you will send it to me, I'll see to it that it gets
All right,
included with the recording.
yeah, all right,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. So that was the easy one. Now I'm going to go to the other ones.
Sharon will answer that one.
Okay. Okay. At least it would be hard for me. I'm not a finance person. So this one, the first one is, did you investigate setting the endowment in a trust as opposed to a fund foundation?
No.
Not very long. Several people, several nonprofits, very large nonprofits that deal with birds, offered to manage the money for us. But we personally knew Kelvin Takeda, who was president of the Hawaii Community Foundation at the time, and it actually helped establish Hakalau. And because that was the trusted umbrella group for accepting nonprofits donations in the Pacific, actually. And we went with that group because it was local and it was acknowledged as being a solid group, and somebody else was managing the money. We did not want to manage the money.
The Community Foundation manages around 1,000 different endowments. It's really large, and they manage millions and millions of billions of dollars. Um, and we don't want to get involved with all the fuss of that. And a trust would create, I think, some additional problems.
Yes.
I I can't even imagine what that would be. I think it would be problematic. Um,
And my sense is the trust would just complicate your world. By involving a third party, you're handing off a lot of the problems that you might encounter down the road.
I see
Okay.
somebody asked about who owns the endowment, and technically it's the Kauai Community Foundation, but the legal paperwork says it is to be used and dispersed only to the Friends of Hakalau. The only time that would change is if the Friends of Hakalau ceased to exist. If the group disbanded and no longer existed, then the way it's worded is that the community foundation would disperse the same amount of funds to the closest organization they could find in the state that does similar things. So the closest thing they could find to what we do, somebody else who's saving birds or something, the disbursements would go to them. But we don't expect the Friends group to disband anytime soon. It's a growing group with, what have we got now, 1,500 members or something like that, a large number of members. And we expect it to be active for a long time. But there is
Okay,
there's no group organization or a person on the board who has any ownership over it, nor can it be taken over by the federal government in any way. We were very careful about that. There's no way that federal government would ever own the capital in
Right.
it.
That we were very careful about that. And they've got the White Community Foundation has multiple layers of lawyers between the endowment and any attempt by the federal government to take it over.
Okay, next question is, do you have an investment strategy?
Bigger is better.
Not really. The Community Foundation does the decisions on the investing. It is invested in stocks and bonds, like anything, but it's conservatively invested. So we're not going to be earning 10 or 15% a year on anything anytime soon. We're going to get 6 to maybe as much as 8% in a real big bull market. But that was the important thing. It's run very much like the university here in Idaho. We're in Moscow, Idaho, with the University of Idaho, and the foundation does the same thing. Their foundation invests in the stock market and in certain bonds very conservatively, so they don't have big spikes in income or whatever. Things that earn good dividends and you get good income. I mean, our last dividend income, our income this year has been something close to $80,000 from this endowment. So the bigger it gets, the more it increases on its own.
Mhm.
But no, we don't have any say in what they invest in. We don't try to have any say in what they invest in. I don't know which stocks and bonds. I could probably find out. We know enough people over there. Somebody would probably tell us who some of the big companies they're invested in are, but we don't know. And as long as it's bringing in good income, I don't really care.
One of the important
Okay.
things for us is we recently had a big gala fundraiser for the endowment, and we hosted the leadership of the White Community Foundation at that gala. They sat at the table with us at dinner, and that was important to get a personal relationship going with the CEO, etc.
Yeah, they have a brand new CEO there who is a very friendly fella and gave us $1,000, and we're real happy with him. But he's a fairly young man, probably not more than early 40s. Seems young to me. Um, and they have been investing now in Hawaii for all kinds of nonprofits in Hawaii for what, nearly 100 years?
Yeah,
A long time.
decade.
So I think that they have, a good reputation for what they do. In fact, when they had the big fires on Maui, they took it upon themselves to start their own endowment within the Friends to take in donations specifically for helping to repair the damage on Maui. And they've taken in, I don't know, 200 million, Michael says, and they're dispersing it themselves to various nonprofits on Maui and, others that are serving Maui to help them get over that disaster. So that one, they
Okay.
created their own piece, but they're managing it well.
And almost every state has a community foundation in the state, I think.
I think a lot of cities do in big states. California, I think, has a bunch of community foundations. Wherever you are, you just do some research. Talk to
A
some lawyers.
quick Google search will probably bring
Right.
something up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is, I think you've already answered this, but I'm going to ask it again just to be sure. Who or what entity name holds ownership of the endowment? Is it separate from the Friends group?
Hawaii Community Foundation. They own it.
Okay, so the community foundation owns the endowment. Okay.
Right.
Right.
All right. And what are the mechanics of the funds transfer to the refuge? And you did go through this, but if you would do that again, for example, is it money from the separate endowment entity to the Friends group to Fish and
Yeah.
Wildlife Service? Is that correct?
Well, not precisely. Um, the disbursement is made from the community foundation to the Friends. So it'll go into the Friends treasury, and the Friends board and the refuge management will decide ahead of time what the priorities for that year are going to be, what they need the money most for, and the Friends will pay for that activity. You don't send the money directly to the refuge. The Friends pay for whatever
That's
it
right.
is that you have agreed that they'll pay for that year.
But it's a partnership with the Fish and Wildlife Service, the refuge manager.
Yeah, we would not, overrule something that they felt they needed badly, other than salaries and things like Liz mentioned it. Otherwise, we do not support salary staff or benefits or anything like that. This is just for management activities.
Bottom line, Hakalau was established for endangered forest birds and related species. And the 80% of the endangered species in Hawaii are what I call conservation reliant. In other words, they are faced with threats that can be mitigated, but they can't be eliminated. And that's an important thing to think of. And that's why money from the endowment will go towards mitigating threats rather than establishing new infrastructure or paying for salaries, things like that. Because that's the most important thing that we see on the landscape is mitigating those threats, because that's full-time employment.
Yeah, fencing would be a big, big issue for us right now. And also eliminating pigs, getting people to go out and trap large numbers of feral pigs on the refuge, which get in every time the fences are down. And right now we've got
Yeah.
7 miles of damaged or missing fence that we've got to replace as fast as we can because pigs can make terrible damage.
Okay, so the next question is the endowment your main fundraising mechanism, or how does this interact with other fundraising? Do you assign specific funding priorities to the endowment?
Like that.
Um, the Friends group also receives um, donations themselves for their own fundraising fund. I have to forget what it's called, but they have a general fund that they do some work out of for the refuge. And they receive checks themselves that are for their general fund, not for the endowment. And they've done this for many years, for decades. They've raised money for their general fund and they use it to do whatever the refuge needs help with.
Yeah, build a water tank. Recently, while we were raising funds for the endowment, simultaneously, the Friends Group was raising funds to rehire people that had been fired, three or more than four people that had been fired from the Fish and Wildlife Service that were taking care of the nursery. Those people were, and they raised $200,000 in 72 hours for that one project.
That was the beginning of last year when they were firing people like crazy. And they managed to fire everybody that managed our greenhouses and, did the plantings. We had nobody taking care of, I don't know how many million seedlings up at the refuge. So had to get volunteers up there like crazy to take care of these plants. But you needed the professionals back at work to do this stuff. So they raised the money for it.
Yeah.
And then within a couple of weeks, they had rehired some of those people back. So we didn't need all of that money. And right now, they're getting ready to use most of what was raised for that salary for them to do some additional larger scale outplanting of plants. We've
So,
got volunteers to plant stuff, and we're going to pay professionals to come up and prepare the ground and do the stuff that you have to have before you can put plants in the ground. So it's all going to the good causes, but um,
Too many,
the
so
bottom
many.
line is the refuge, I mean, the Friends group is able to simultaneously, they can walk and chew gum at the same time. They can raise funds for the endowment and for
Or,
seedlings.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
yeah,
And
they
there
have
are
their
always more
own.
needs than there are funds to pay for it.
Well, that's for sure. That's
Yeah.
for sure.
The next question is, and you've answered this one, but would you go through it one more time? Can you specify how your money is invested? And you mentioned that you don't pay attention to that. That's the foundation. But do you get performance reports from the foundation?
Yeah.
There is an annual report that comes out, yes, that says how much they've earned and how much they've taken in fees. A usual financial report at the end of the year. It does not talk about the individual stocks that they're invested in or anything. You'd have to, have a personal conversation with them if you wanted to know specifically what they invested in. But they do tell you, how much
Okay.
they had invested and how much they made during the year and how much it cost them. It's a usual thing that
Yeah.
like you get from any business. And we're
Yeah.
happy with it. We have not been unhappy with the way they're investing. They're making us good money.
Yeah. Sounds like it. Okay. You mentioned that you receive out-of-state donations. Have you had to register with state secretaries, the process you have to go through if you get out-of-state donations?
No,
My question is, should we?
No, no, no.
no. As
Um,
far as I know,
I'm not gonna get into that discussion because we go through that every once in a while too. But it is true that some states require you to register with them and pay a fee if you're going to collect money from their residents or request money from their residents. But what we've been told by our Secretary of State and uh, our nonprofit organization is they're not going to mess with you, your small potatoes. So far we have not done that, and we don't get that many
Okay, all right. As long
donations
as you
from out of
don't do
state.
it, we won't do it.
I
Well,
never even
no,
heard of
I'm
that.
not giving you advice. I'm just telling you what I hear. What I hear.
Now
Okay.
you're sounding like a lawyer.
Well, I was married to a lawyer, so I have a justification.
Well,
Um,
no, we don't report to any Secretary of State in any other state about getting checks. Um, most of the ones from out of state are not the really big ones. We had one or two exceptions of people, somebody in Texas that, along with his cousin, I think, sold some property and determined ahead of time that when it sold, they were going to give the proceeds to Hakalau, and they sent us $100,000. That's the biggest one we've ever received from out of state. And we haven't
yeah,
heard from them since. They haven't, that was 4 or 5 years ago. They haven't sent us any additional money, but that's great. These things come up.
yeah.
We've never heard of them before. Don't know who they were or how they learned about us, but if they want to send us money, we're happy.
Okay,
Usually
I have.
the out of state donations might be $100, maybe a couple hundred. They're generally not huge.
Yeah. I have one last question in the chat, and then we'll open it up if there are any questions from the floor. So, to pay for the projects you select with the Refuge Manager, does the Refuge send you an invoice for a product or service and the friends pay for it?
Hmm.
So far as I know, we haven't worked out that kind of detail. I know that they're working on this form that's going to allow us to give money to the, you know, to something on the refuge. But
Okay.
how that's going to work, whether they need to invoice us for it, I don't know.
You know, when you get that process figured out, can you let us know what because it'll
Sure,
probably be different from region to region. That's been
that
my
could be.
experience anyway.
Very likely, yeah. We'll probably know by this coming
Yeah,
January.
Yeah.
because we haven't
Yeah.
done a disbursement yet, so we'll still have that experience to go through. But um, I
Okay.
was in my head, I was assuming that when they had pig hunters in there trapping pigs and whatever, that we would simply pay them for their service on behalf of the refuge, but maybe not. Maybe between the management of the refuge and the Friends president and board, maybe they'll decide on some other process, but just so
Mm.
the end result is to get some service done for the refuge. But we'll let you know if we find once
Okay,
we
yeah,
find out.
when you figure out what that process is, if we can add that to the materials, I mentioned that the recording will be posted on the Corfa website and we add materials that go along with it. So that would be great to add that if once it's figured out. And again, knowing that it'll probably vary from region to region and refuge to refuge. At least that's been our experience with a lot of things.
Yeah.
That was the last question in the chat. I'll open it up now. Are there any questions from the floor that anyone has and did not put in the chat? We're right at the top of the hour, so very good on your timing. Not seeing any hands. You can just take yourself off of mute and ask your question if you have one.
Yeah, Richard Micka from Detroit River International Wildlife Refuge. Uh, we work with a foundation that's very large, hundreds of millions of dollars, and they take care of everything we do. Just like you said, your foundation helps. They do the investments. It turns out very well. But I was under the impression that this was going to be something bigger. That National Wildlife Refuge Association was going to have something more on a national scale that everybody could jump on instead of individual friends groups doing it. That the Fish and National Wildlife Refuge Association might take it on. Were you of that? Were you under that impression?
This is Richard. This is a separate, different thing. That endeavor to that
Oh, okay, very
cha
good. I understand.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Mhm.
Yeah, this the foundation or the endowment that
And
Sharon and Mike are talking about is one that has been set up already and is strictly for Hakalau Forest.
Yeah, just
The one you're talking about is a more general one that's only in the discussion phase.
oh, okay, yeah, because we've got our endowment. It's running pretty good. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, not hearing or seeing any other questions, Sharon and Mike, thank you very much for the information. The recording of this webinar will be placed on the website, so if you want to go back and review it. Sharon, if your notes are available, if that's something you can send, that would be helpful too. So you can decide if you send that to me. Again, I will send it along to the people that do the posting on the website so that that would accompany the recording of the webinar.
I'll do that right away.
Thank you. And your endowment agreement, what was it? Whatever the other thing was that we said we would post if you could provide it.
You wanted to see the endowment agreement.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. We really appreciate the information. It gives us a lot of good ideas about how to get started on this. I see Ken giving you the Hawaiian, whatever you call it. I can't remember the name of it, but
Shaka.
that's
Shaka.
exactly. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next month when we'll talk about the Blue Goose Passport. There are lots of good new ideas. It's going to be a different document, a different kind of a product, and so please join us to find out more about that and to offer your ideas. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.